In the last slideshow, I showed you Amarteus, who expelled the Persians from Egypt. And then there was the 29th and 30th dynasties, which were the two last purely Egyptian dynasties. The Persians would reinvade for a short period of time uh, from 343 to 332 BC, and then be expelled by this guy, Alexander the Great, who would introduce what's called the Ptolemaic period. And this would be the final blow for the Persians. They were done with Alexander because Alexander would march through all of Persia and conquer the whole thing and completely destroy it. He would fight against Darius' grandson, Darius III, shown here in a famous mosaic from Pompeii. This is, a very large mosaic, and it shows the Battle of Issus with Alexander there on the left on the red horse, killing some of Darius' soldiers as Darius leans out to help them, but he is turned back at this battle. It was a terrible battle for Darius. He actually lost his family. They were captured by Alexander, and he'd be the last of the Persian emperors. Um, Now, I talk about this fresco a lot, once again, if you take my Greek and Roman class, but we got to stick with Egypt. What happens is, after he dies, his generals fight over what was left of the Persian Empire. This is what the red, green, blue, orange, etc. That was, well, most of it was the Persian Empire. So the southern Greek part was not. But it's a big area, and he spent 12 years campaigning through this region and took all of it. And would eventually die in Babylon. Then there was a little bit of a civil war between his generals to take the different areas, and a guy by the name of Ptolemy, one of his generals from Macedonia, which is in northern Greece. The Greeks sort of thought of him as separate than the southern Greeks. He gets Egypt, and he quickly moves Alexander's body from Babylon to Alexandria, the city that Alexander had built in Egypt to be a center of learning, and that would be the capital under the Ptolemies. And these are all Greek men and women who were the emperors here. Alexandria still exists, and it's still a hotbed of education. There'd be the great Alexandrian Museum and Library built there and taken care of by people like Cleopatra, who would be the last of the Ptolemaic emperors. Cleopatra is a Greek name. You have to know that it's not an Egyptian name. I know women named Cleopatra. And here we see Ptolemy Soter, the first Ptolemy, here on the right, looking very much in the Greek style, not typical of the of Egyptians at all. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't copy the Egyptian styles. Indeed, I'll show you some where Cleopatra is shown in it that way. We can't forget that it's because of the Ptolemies that we have the Rosetta Stone, right? This is one of the Ptolemies in the middle, Ptolemy the Sixth or something like that. They all had the same names. And we've talked about this already, but it's under this empire that it gets built, and that's why it gets made, rather. That's why it's in Greek and then in Egyptian, right? So both people could read it. And at this time, we do get things like Cleopatra, who's mentioned in the hieroglyphs on the stele on the right, but also on the left, she is shown here, and she's seated there, suckling Caesarion, who I'll come back to. The second row from the top, it says Cleopatras, if you know the Greek alphabet. And so sometimes there's Greek inscriptions, sometimes Egyptians. Now, here's a painting of Cleopatra from Herculaneum, a city that was covered with by ash when Pompeii was covered in 70 AD. And here's a painting of her. Very nice little painting. Look at the little pins in the top of her hair with pearls coming out. But Cleopatra, once again, is a Greek. And she gets into a civil war with her younger brother, this guy. And they have a battle over who's going to control Egypt. There was also the idea that, as I've talked about before, there's brother-sister marriages in Egypt, but Cleopatra was a Macedonian; she was a Greek. She wasn't going to do that. In any case, these guys have a fall into a civil war. And in the middle of that civil war, this guy on the left, Julius Caesar, shows up. And Cleopatra presents herself to him. They have a relationship. She's much younger than Julius Caesar. He's already married, as a matter of fact, with a wife back in Rome. But he stays in Egypt. He loves Egypt. And they have a child together who's called Caesarion. By the way, if you're wondering about the Caesarian sections, that actually comes from Caesar because that's the way he was born. Here's a temple at Dendera that shows Cleopatra on the left, and then on the right is her son Caesarion. Here's another image of him on the left, looking with quite a grimace here, and on the right here he is under this Horus falcon. I believe that's also at Dendera. Cleopatra was painted frequently after she died. Here is another shot of her at Pompeii. She's shown as Venus Genetrix, and on the right you can see that her son Caesarion is the Cupid on her Venus. She'd become a very interesting subject for the Romans. We get our calendar from this. It's by a Greek by the name of Sisigines, and she got this. So we started the solar calendar when Julius Caesar adopted it from the Egyptians and put it into place with the Romans, the 12-month, 360-day calendar. It's now called the Gregorian calendar because there was just one little change made in the 16th century. But in any case, she goes back to Cleopatra goes back to Rome with Caesar. Caesar implements a dictatorship over this Roman Senate, and he is assassinated. And then after his assassination, the guy on the left and the guy on the right, this Octavian on the left, Mark Antony on the right, become co-emperors. And at one point, Mark Antony goes to the east. He sees Cleopatra. They fall in love, and he declares that he wants his this to be, he wants the Eastern Mediterranean as his empire. He doesn't want to rule with Octavian, who's a young man, and Mark Antony's angry that Julius Caesar didn't leave the empire to him, since they had fought side by side for so long. And also, she has Caesar's son, so that's a ticket for justification for being the next emperor, right? He could be the emperor while he's raising Caesar's successor. Octavian doesn't like this. He battles Cleopatra, shown here in the middle, and Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium near off the coast of Greece in 31 BC. They lose. They both separately flee back to Egypt. Mark Antony is killed by Cleopatra's soldiers. Cleopatra survives for about a year, and then Augustus makes it down to Alexandria, and she commits suicide by letting a venomous snake called an asp bite her. It's thought that she did this because actually the snake was somewhat holy to the Egyptians. And then Octavian has this son killed and returns to Rome, names himself Augustus, and then becomes the first emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and ends the Roman Republic and brings about the Roman Empire. I talk a lot about this in my other classes. Interesting, some of the things that are found in Egypt during the Roman period, and one of which are these very interesting portrait coffins or mummies of the Romans that show us exactly what they looked like. And they were painted in a style called encaustic, which is sort of painting with a wax onto the wood. And then they were wrapped up like this. So it was just a piece of wood that was attached to this wrapping. So what they did is they just painted the portrait, and then the person got wrapped up as a mummy, and then with all this linen and stuff around it, and then this and then the portrait would get attached to her. And there's about 900 of these have been found. There's a lot of them. So the Romans continued the practice of mummification. And as I talked about in the last class, the Romans would embrace Egyptian culture. They would build temples that looked just like old Egyptian temples. A nice Nile mosaic from this time showing the Nile with various animals standing on islands as the Nile, turns back and forth. Spectacular mosaic. See some details of it here on the left. It's a fun mosaic if you ever have a chance to look at it quite closely. And it shows Roman influence on Egypt. And then with that, we end.